Nigeria is hurtling towards financial precipice. The recent disclosure by the International Monetary Fund (IMF) about Nigeria's relentless pursuit of loans has raised serious concerns about the long-term economic stability of the country. Despite already staggering debt levels, the Nigerian government persists in securing more loans, entangling the nation in a web of obligations that could stifle its economic future. It is now clearer than ever that Nigeria needs a complete reassessment of its fiscal policies to avoid an economic catastrophe. In a recent address at the IMF/World Bank meetings in Washington, D.C., the IMF's financial counselor, Tobias Adrian, underscored Nigeria's worrisome debt activities, which he described as reflective of a broader trend among the frontier markets. Despite surging financing costs, Nigeria continues to borrow, but the terms are no longer favorable with the higher interest rates and shorter repayment periods. These conditions mean that Nigeria is taking on increasingly expensive debt that will eventually have to be paid back, likely at the expense of essential public services. This situation is unsustainable and undermines the country's ability to achieve long-term economic stability. The IMF did acknowledge some recent monetary policy adjustments by the Central Bank of Nigeria, including interest rate hikes and foreign exchange reforms. These efforts are commendable on the surface as they show a willingness to address structural issues within the economy. However, these measures have been largely offset by other policy decisions, such as the controversial removal of the fuel subsidy by President Tinubu's administration. The IMF distanced itself from this move, which has inflicted immense hardship on ordinary Nigerians, who now face record-high living costs. Fuel prices have nearly tripled, leading to inflation that has decimated household incomes, eroded purchasing power, and placed many families on the edge of survival. As prices rise across the board, any potential benefit from monetary tightening measures are effectively nullified for the average citizen. Nigeria's current borrowing approach raises critical concerns about the country's priorities. According to the IMF, a significant portion of these loans is funneled into consumptive expenses, with little left for investment in productive sectors. This trend is incredibly short-sighted as it fails to generate the economic growth needed to offset rising debt obligations. Instead, Nigeria's government is incurring debt to meet immediate spending needs, while fundamental sectors like infrastructure, healthcare, and education remain underfunded. Such a strategy not only threatens the nation's fiscal health, but also compromises the potential of future generations who will inherit the burden of this reckless borrowing. The implications of Nigeria's ballooning debt are dire. The Debt Management Office revealed in June that Nigeria's total public debt had surged to an astounding 121.67 trillion naira, that is $91.46 billion as of March 31, 2024, an increase of nearly 25% in just 3 months. The pace of borrowing is unsustainable, particularly when Nigeria's economic growth rate lags far behind its debt growth. The IMF's latest World Economic Outlook projects that Nigeria's economy will grow at a modest 2.9% in 2024, barely matching the 2023 growth rate. This level of growth, which barely outpaces population increase, is insufficient to leave Nigerians out of poverty or reduce the risk of high unemployment rate. The gap between economic and debt accumulation signals an impending debt crisis where the cost of servicing debt will consume an increasing share of national revenue, squeezing out funds for critical development needs. An escalating debt burden not only limits fiscal flexibility but also restricts Nigeria's economic sovereignty. Debt obligations often come with stringent conditions imposed by international creditors, which can severely limit Nigeria's ability to make independent policy choices. With a growing portion of the budget going towards debt servicing, Nigeria risks ceding control over its economic destiny, effectively becoming beholden to the interests of foreign lenders. Such dependence erodes national sovereignty and restricts Nigeria's ability to respond effectively to internal challenges, leaving it vulnerable to external economic pressures. The reliance on debt as a quick fix for fiscal gaps is not a sustainable solution. It merely postpones the inevitable reckoning. The Nigerian government must recognize that a debt-fueled economy is akin to building on quicksand. Without a fundamental shift towards economic self-reliance, Nigeria's debt trap will only deepen. Instead of pursuing more loans, Nigerian leaders must prioritize structural reforms that encourage sustainable economic growth. Reducing the reliance on oil revenue by diversifying into sectors like agriculture, technology, and manufacturing is essential to build a resilient economy. The focus should shift from consumptive-based borrowing to investment in value-added industries that can generate employment, boost exports, and strengthen the country's economic base. Nigeria's spending patterns must also be critically reevaluated. Transparency and accountability in government expenditures are essential to ensure that public funds are directed towards programs and projects that will yield strong, long-term economic benefits. For instance, rather than borrowing to cover subsidies and administrative costs, Nigeria's government should focus on infrastructure development, healthcare expansion, and educational reform. These sectors not only create jobs but also contribute to human capital development, which is a fundamental building block for any prosperous nation. To address the debt issue effectively, Nigeria must implement a fiscal discipline framework that prioritizes productive investment over consumptive spending. This approach will require difficult choices and perhaps politically unpopular decisions. But the alternative, continued borrowing, is far more damaging. A clear example is the recent debt uptick for fuel subsidy removal, which, though designed to reduce long-term costs, has led to economic shocks and hardship for Nigerians in the long term, in the immediate term, rather. Such actions erode public trust and create a vicious cycle where borrowing becomes necessary to address the fallout from previous borrowing. Furthermore, Nigeria should enhance its revenue collection mechanisms. Strengthening tax administration and curbing tax evasion could significantly boost government revenue without resorting to loans. The current over-reliance on borrowing reflects not only a fiscal gap but also an inefficiency in revenue generation. With a stronger, more effective tax collection framework, Nigeria could potentially reduce its borrowing needs while fostering a culture of fiscal responsibility. Developing this capacity requires an overhaul of existing policies and procedures, along with targeted investment in tax infrastructure and workforce training. The IMF's cautionary stance highlights a critical juncture for Nigeria. While international assistance can provide temporary relief, it is not a substitute for domestic economic reform. Nigeria must work to reduce its vulnerability to external shocks by fostering a diversified, resilient economy that can withstand global market fluctuations. Policymakers should draw on these moments of fiscal reckoning to commit to a new path, one that prioritizes growth from within over dependence on foreign capital. Nigeria must confront the harsh reality that its current approach to borrowing is unsustainable. Continued dependence on loans will erode both economic stability and sovereignty, leaving Nigeria vulnerable to crises that could take generations to overcome. The time to act is now. The government must shift focus from short-term fixes to long-term solutions, embracing fiscal discipline, revenue diversification, and investment in productive sectors. Nigeria's future depends on the decisions made today. If Nigeria is to chart a prosperous course, it must put an end to this dangerous reliance on debt and take decisive steps to secure a sustainable and self-reliant economy for generations to come. Thank you.